The sky that burned. The rain did not fall like waters. It fell like punishment. From a sky the color of bruised iron, it poured in slanted sheets, thick and relentless, striking the broken metal roofs of the abandoned industrial yard with a violent hiss. Each drop that landed sparked a faint plume of vapor, thin spirals of ghostly steam twisting upward as if the earth itself were exhaling pain. The sound was everywhere, sizzling, spitting, eating away at the world one molecule at a time. Once this yard had been alive. Towering cranes had swung heavy loads through the air. Engines had roared and men had shouted over the clamor of steel striking steel. Sparks from welding torches had flared bright against the dusk. Now the cranes stood frozen mid-gesture, their long arms bent like the bones of fallen giants. Rusted vehicles lay scattered in uneven rows, their frames skeletal and collapsing. Windows had long ago shattered. Tires had melted into warped rings of black residue. Even the concrete bore scars, where years of acid rainfall had etched shallow wounds into its surface. The storm did not rage in bursts, it endured. It soaked into seams and crevices, dripped through fractured roofs, pooled in shallow depressions, and devoured whatever dared remain exposed. The air carried the sharp, metallic scent of corrosion, a smell that scraped at lungs and stung the back of the throat. Thunder rolled above in low, heavy murmurs like distant artillery. Beneath the carcass of an overturned transport truck, something small trembled. The truck had once been painted a proud industrial blue. Now its color had leached into a dull, blistered gray, the paint eaten away in irregular patches that exposed raw metal beneath. One side had collapsed inward when it overturned, creating a shallow hollow, a pocket of shadow that resisted the worst of the rain. It was there that the hatchling lay. It had entered the world only hours before. Birth had been warmth and pressure and a sudden tearing brightness. The shell that had encased it, thin and pale compared to the others, had cracked unevenly. While its siblings had emerged strong, scales already shimmering with healthy color, it had struggled. Its body had felt too light, too exposed, too soft. Its scales were the color of bleached bone, nearly translucent along the fragile membranes of its tiny wings. Where others of its kind bore deep emerald or ember-red hides, it bore no pigment at all. Its eyes, wide and luminous, shone with a faint pinkish hue that reflected even the dimmest light. Albino. Different. Weak. The storm had begun before it could stand properly. The others had not hesitated. Instinct had driven them toward higher ground, toward the shelter of fractured buildings and corroded drainage tunnels where the rain could not reach so easily. Their movements had been swift and certain. No one had looked back. The hatchling had tried to follow. Its legs, thin and shaking, had buckled beneath it. Its wings, still damp and folded awkwardly against its sides, dragged along the ground. By the time it had found its footing, the storm had thickened into a burning curtain between it and everything else. It did not understand abandonment. It understood only sensation. Cold, pain, hunger. Each droplet that slipped past the truck's jagged edge and struck its exposed skin produced a sharp, biting sizzle. The acid was not strong enough to kill instantly, but it burned. It left tiny smoking marks where it touched, angry red irritation spreading across its pale scales. The hatchling flinched with every impact, curling tighter against the warped metal floor beneath it. The metal was not kind either. Though it shielded from the worst of the rain, it carried a bitter chill that seeped into its small body. The hatchling pressed its side against it anyway, instinctively seeking solidity, something firm in a world that felt violently unstable. Its stomach twisted with an ache it did not yet recognize as hunger. Its lungs, new and delicate, pulled in air that tasted wrong, sharp, and corroded. Breathing felt like swallowing needles. It tried to call out. The sound that left its throat was thin and broken, somewhere between a chirp and a cry. It startled even itself. It tried again, louder, forcing air past the tightness in its chest. The rain swallowed the sound whole. The world answered only with hissing. The hatchling blinked against the sting in its eyes. Vision blurred as droplets gathered along its lashes and slid downward in burning trails. It shook its head weakly, scattering moisture, but more replaced it instantly. It did not know words. It did not know concepts like fairness or cruelty. It only knew that something was wrong. The yard stretched vast and distorted beyond the shelter of the truck. Through gaps in the metal, it could see the skeletal legs of cranes cutting into the sky like blackened spears. Lightning flickered between clouds, illuminating the ruins in harsh white flashes. In those split seconds of brightness, every shadow sharpened, every jagged edge stood out in brutal clarity. Then darkness returned, thicker than before. The hatchling shifted, attempting to tuck its wings closer to its body. The thin membranes clung uselessly, still fragile from birth. One drooped awkwardly, the joint not yet strong enough to fold cleanly. It winced as another droplet slipped through the truck's fractured side and struck the tender skin where wing met shoulder. Sizzle. It gasped a small pain sound. Instinct drove it to burrow. Tiny claws scraped against the corroded truck bed, searching for softness that did not exist. The metal groaned faintly beneath its movement, weakened by years of chemical erosion. A small flake broke loose and skittered across the surface. The hatchling froze. For a fleeting second, it imagined the metal itself might collapse and expose it fully to the storm. The fear was primal and absolute. It pressed its body flat, heart racing wildly beneath fragile ribs. Its pulse thudded so loudly it seemed impossible that something larger would not hear it. But there was nothing larger left in the yard, nothing living, nothing watching. Thunder cracked sharply overhead. The sound tore through the sky like a split seam, and the hatchling flinched violently. Its claws scraped again, this time the sound echoed, hollow and lonely. It cried out once more. This time the cry lasted longer. It rose from somewhere deeper, pulled by a desperate need that had no name. The sound wavered, thin but persistent, a plea cast blindly into a world that had already turned away. No answer came. The rain intensified, drumming against metal in erratic patterns. Steam rose thicker now, swirling low to the ground. It coiled around the truck's undercarriage and drifted through the hollow space where the hatchling lay. The air grew warmer but not kinder. The hatchling's movement slowed. Energy drained quickly from a body so new. It had not eaten. It had not rested properly since emerging from its shell. Its muscles trembled from the effort of simply existing beneath the onslaught. Its cries softened into small, uneven whimpers. It did not know that it was small. It did not know that its albinism made it more vulnerable to the harsh light hidden beyond the storm clouds. It did not know that its kind had survived for centuries by strength and flame and ruthless selection. It only knew that it hurts. Its head lowered gradually until its chin rested against the cold metal. Its luminous eyes remained open, reflecting faint streaks of lightning beyond the truck's edge. Each blink came slower than the last. The world narrowed. Sound dulled into a distant hiss. The burning sensation across its skin became less sharp, not because the rain had weakened, but because exhaustion wrapped around its senses like a heavy blanket. It curled tighter, tail wrapping instinctively around its body. One small claw hooked against a crack in the metal floor, as though gripping something might prevent it from slipping away entirely. Lightning split the sky again, brighter this time, closer. For a heartbeat, the entire yard flashed white. In that frozen instant, the hatchling's pale body seemed almost luminous, a fragile shape carved from moonlight beneath a coffin of rusted steel. Then darkness fell once more. Its breathing grew shallow. In the distance, faint at first, nearly indistinguishable from thunder, another sound emerged. Low, mechanical, rhythmic. The hatchling did not recognize the growl of an engine. It did not understand machines or combustion or fuel. The sound was foreign to its instincts. But it was different from the storm. It vibrated through the ground in subtle pulses, traveling along corroded metal and fractured concrete. The truck's frame carried the vibration inward, faint tremors brushing against the hatchling's fragile body. Its eyes flickered. Some small part of it, something older than thought, stirred in response to that difference. The engine roared louder, approaching from beyond the yard's twisted gates. Headlights cut briefly through the rain, diffused into hazy halos by falling acid. The beams swept across broken cranes and rusted vehicles, searching. The hatchling could not see the lights directly from its sheltered hollow, but it felt the vibrations strengthen. It felt the world shift slightly as something large rolled across the ruined ground outside. Its breathing hitched. Another tremor. Closer now. The storm continued to burn. The rain continued to fall. But somewhere beyond the yard's gates, through sheets of corrosive downpour and drifting steam, something alive was moving toward the ruins. And beneath the overturned truck, the abandoned albino hatchling, weak, trembling, and barely conscious, clung to the faintest tremor of change as the sky above it continued to burn. The mechanic who stayed. Most people had evacuated the outer districts years ago, when the first warnings came through government channels and emergency broadcasts. At first, the rains had only been irregular, slightly acidic, inconvenient, something that ate paint faster than usual and left faint scars on exposed steel. Then the chemistry shifted. The factories that once belched smoke into the sky had shut down too late, and the atmosphere turned hostile. Metal blistered. Concrete pitted. Skin burned. The outer districts emptied in waves. Families packed what they could carry and left behind what they could not. Houses, vehicles, heirlooms, entire lifetimes of accumulation. Windows were boarded, doors were chained. Power grids failed one section at a time until the night horizon lost its glow. The industrial zone became a graveyard of labor. But not everyone left. At the very edge of the district, where the factories gave way to fractured highways and skeletal cranes, a reinforced garage still stood with its lights on. The building had once serviced heavy transport vehicles. Its walls were thick, lined with sealant panels installed long before evacuation orders became mandatory. The roof had been coated and recoated with chemical-resistant layers. Gutters had been redesigned to redirect corrosive rainfall into neutralization tanks. Inside, air filtration units hummed steadily, their soft mechanical rhythm the heartbeat of a structure refusing to surrender. The mechanic worked alone. He was not a hero, he was not reckless. He simply did not see a reason to abandon everything he knew. Machines still broke. Generators still failed. Pumps still corroded. And as long as something malfunctioned, someone would need to repair it. He stood at a workbench beneath bright white task lights, tightening the final bolt on a filtration unit salvaged from an old water treatment plant. His hands moved with practiced precision, turning the wrench until resistance felt right, not too loose, not too strained. Torque was a language he understood instinctively. Grease streaked across his jaw where he had absently wiped sweat away with a dirty wrist. His protective hood hung loose around his neck, unzipped for airflow inside the sealed garage. His sleeves were rolled halfway up his forearms, revealing skin marked with old scars, thin white lines from sharp edges, weld burns, and decades of hands-on labor. The world outside had collapsed into chemical ruin. Inside, he maintained order. On one wall hung neatly arranged tools, wrenches sorted by size, pliers, insulated cutters, welding masks, spools of copper wire. On another stood shelves of salvaged parts labeled in careful handwriting, valves, filters, pressure gauges, engine mounts. A portable generator hummed in the corner, feeding power to overhead lights and climate systems. He leaned back slightly, examining the filtration unit. Good enough, he muttered to himself. He believed in second chances, not in an abstract, sentimental way, but in a practical one. Broken things could function again if someone took the time to understand where they had failed. Metal fatigued, seals cracked, circuits burned out, none of it was malicious, it was wear, entropy, neglect. Repair was a form of defiance. Lightning struck somewhere close. The flash bled through the high, reinforced windows, and a half-second later thunder slammed against the building like a physical blow. The overhead lights flickered violently before stabilizing. The filtration unit on the bench rattled slightly from the vibration. He paused. Storms were common now, but each one still carried the threat of structural failure. He turned instinctively toward the control panel mounted near the garage door, scanning pressure readings and runoff levels. Everything held steady. Then he heard it. At first, he dismissed it. The industrial yard was a symphony of distortion when storms hit. Warped metal shrieked as temperatures shifted. Loose panels flapped violently. Corroded hinges wailed in the wind. The rain itself produced a constant hiss that merged into something almost organic. The sound came again. Thin, high, not metal. He straightened slowly. It was faint, nearly swallowed by thunder, but distinct enough to separate from the background noise. It wavered at the end like something running out of breath. He stepped away from the workbench and held still, listening. Another lightning flash. Another crack of thunder. Then, there, a fragile cry. He frowned. No animal could last out there, he muttered. The acidity levels in recent storms were severe. Unprotected organic tissue blistered within minutes. Birds had long ago disappeared from the district. Stray dogs had either been evacuated or succumbed to exposure years prior. Even rodents avoided open ground when clouds thickened. Yet the sound came again. Weak, desperate, alive. The mechanic felt something tighten in his chest, not fear exactly, but recognition. He had heard similar sounds before, though not here. Years ago, before evacuation, a collapsed scaffolding had trapped a coworker beneath twisted beams. The man had tried to shout for help, but debris and dust had turned his voice thin and ragged. The mechanic had followed that sound then too. He did not deliberate long. He moved with quiet efficiency, shrugging back into his reinforced coat. The material was heavy, lined with chemical-resistant layers designed to repel corrosive moisture for short periods. He pulled the hood up this time, sealing the visor in place with a practiced twist of the collar. From the shelf beside the door, he grabbed a canister of neutralizing spray, a pressurized solution capable of counteracting acid on contact. He clipped it to his belt. The cry came once more. He pressed the control for the garage door. The mechanism groaned as it lifted, revealing a curtain of falling acid rain beyond. The moment the seal broke, droplets splattered against his visor, streaking downward in faintly smoking trails before the protective coating repelled them. The sound outside intensified instantly, hissing, sizzling, the sharp percussion of rain striking metal carcasses. The yard stretched before him like a battlefield abandoned mid-conflict. Cranes loomed like executioners. Vehicles sagged in uneven rows. Steam coiled across the ground where acid met exposed surfaces. He stepped out. The rain hammered against his coat, tapping, sliding, testing seams. Each step carried risk. Prolonged exposure would eventually compromise even reinforced material. He kept movements deliberate, scanning the yard for the source of the sound. For a moment, he heard nothing but the storm. Then, a small fractured cry. To the right, near the overturned transport truck. He adjusted his direction immediately, boots splashing through shallow pools of diluted acid that fizzed faintly around the soles. The neutralizing solution built into his footwear left faint, cloudy trails in the water. The closer he came, the clearer the sound became. It was not mechanical. It was not wind. It was pain. He rounded the side of the truck, its once blue exterior now mottled gray and blistered. One side had collapsed inward, forming a shadowed hollow beneath. The cry came from there. He crouched. Rain struck harder at this angle, sliding off the truck's jagged edges and spattering across his shoulders. He leaned down, bringing himself level with the opening. For a moment, he saw nothing but darkness and rising steam. Then he switched on the small inspection light clipped to his coat. The beam cut through shadow. Two luminous eyes reflected back at him. He froze. The world narrowed to that small hollow beneath corroded steel. The creature inside was tiny, no larger than a toolbox. It was curled tightly against the metal, body pressed low, wings clinging awkwardly to its sides. Its scales were pale beyond anything natural, white, almost translucent, marred by red, blistered patches where acid had burned through delicate skin. Albino. The word formed automatically in his mind, though it did nothing to explain the rest of what he was seeing. The creature's chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven motions. Each breath seemed like effort. Steam curled around it, framing its fragile body in wavering haze. He had repaired engines his entire life. He understood wiring harnesses and fuel injection systems. He understood the relationship between compression ratios and combustion timing. He could diagnose mechanical failure by sound alone. He did not understand dragons. If this was a dragon, the yard had always been rumored to shelter strange wildlife after evacuation. Mutations, survivors adapting to chemical extremes. He had dismissed most of it as superstition born from isolation. But the creature beneath the truck was no rumor. It blinked slowly against the beam of his light, eyes wide and glassy. There was no aggression in them, only exhaustion and fear. For several long seconds, neither moved. Rain struck metal inches above his head. Thunder rolled. The creature tried to lift its head slightly. A small sound escaped its throat, not a hiss, not quite a cry, but something broken in between. The mechanic felt something inside him shift. He did not understand its species, but he understood suffering. Easy, he said quietly, though the storm likely drowned the word before it reached the creature. His voice was not loud, it did not need to be. Tone carried meaning beyond language. The hatchling attempted to bare its teeth. The effect was almost pitiful. What emerged instead of a threatening hiss was a weak, fractured squeak. Its jaw trembled from the effort. "It's all right," he murmured again. He removed one glove carefully. Direct skin exposure was risky, but he needed dexterity. He extended his bare hand slowly into the hollow, palm facing upward, fingers relaxed. The creature flinched. Its body tensed as though preparing for impact. Tiny claws scraped weakly against metal. He did not rush. He reached instead for the neutralizing spray with his other hand and aimed carefully at the reddened patches along its flank. He pressed the nozzle lightly. A fine mist coated the irritated skin. Where acid residue lingered, faint fizzing occurred as the solution counteracted chemical burn. The creature jerked at the sensation, but did not lash out. "Good," he breathed. He sprayed again, covering wings and shoulders with careful precision. Steam lessened around the creature as active corrosion diminished. Up close, he could see how young it truly was. The membranes of its wings were still slightly wrinkled from confinement in a shell. The claws at the tips were sharp but fragile. Its scales had not yet hardened fully, some were almost soft beneath the light. How long had it been out here? He did not want to calculate the answer. The rain intensified again, splattering against his visor. Time outside was limited. He slid his other glove off, stuffing both into his coat pocket. From the back of his belt, he pulled a folded acid-resistant tarp, normally used to cover sensitive equipment during transport. He eased it open slowly, letting the creature see the motion. "It's just cover," he said softly. The hatchling's eyes tracked him with surprising focus. When he reached forward again, he did not grab, he wrapped. The tarp slid beneath the creature first, creating a barrier between its burned skin and the corroded metal floor. It twitched at the contact but was too weak to resist strongly. He folded one side over its back, then the other, enclosing it gently but securely. Its body was shockingly light when he lifted it. Warm, feverish from chemical irritation, but fragile. For a split second, he worried it might disintegrate in his hands like the metal around them. It did not. It trembled instead, a small, violent shiver against his chest as he secured the tarp. Its head poked weakly from the fold, luminous eyes still open. "Stay with me," he muttered without thinking. He rose to his feet carefully, cradling the bundle close to reduce exposure. The run back to the garage felt longer than the walk out. Rain hammered harder now, striking his back and shoulders with sharp insistence. He angled his body to shield the creature as best he could. Acid slid down his coat in streaks, hissing faintly when it struck reinforced seams. Behind him, the overturned truck groaned softly as corrosion continued its patient work. Flakes of metal slewed away and fell into acidic puddles below. The yard did not care what he carried. It would continue dissolving regardless. He reached the garage threshold and slammed the control panel with his elbow. The door descended with heavy finality behind him, sealing out the storm in a grinding metallic sweep. Inside, the air felt suddenly thick and warm. The filtration units compensated instantly, increasing airflow to neutralize any contaminants carried in on his suit. He stood still for a moment, breathing hard, rainwater dripping from his coat onto the concrete floor. The bundle in his arms shifted weakly. "You're safe," he said, though he had no idea if that was true. He crossed to the main work table, the same one where engines had been dismantled hours earlier, and cleared a space with swift, decisive motions. Tools clattered into bins. A clean industrial mat was spread across the metal surface. He lowered the hatchling carefully. It made a faint sound at the change in position, claws flexing weakly against the tarp. He peeled the protective material back, just enough to inspect the damage again under bright, controlled light. Up close, the burns looked worse than they had beneath the truck. Angry red patches marred the pale scales. Some areas were already blistering, others were raw and vulnerable. He swallowed. "I don't know what you are," he admitted quietly, "but I'm not letting you dissolve." The creature's eyes blinked slowly. Outside, thunder rolled again. Inside, beneath steady lights and the hum of filtration systems, a mechanic who had refused to leave the ruins stood over something entirely beyond his understanding. And instead of stepping back, he reached for the tools he did understand. What survived? Inside the garage, the air filters hummed steadily, pulling contaminated air through layered membranes designed to strip poison from breath. The sound was low and constant, almost soothing, a mechanical lullaby against the fatting violence of the storm outside. The mechanic laid the hatchling on a padded worktable usually reserved for dismantled engines. The table bore scars of past labor, shallow grooves from sliding transmissions, dark stains from oil and coolant, faint scorch marks from welding sparks. It had held broken machinery for years. Now it held something alive. Under clean, unwavering light, the hatchling's injuries looked worse than they had beneath the truck. What had seemed like mild irritation in the shadows revealed itself as angry red burns spreading unevenly across pearl-white scales. In some places, the acid had eaten through the thin outer layer entirely, leaving raw skin exposed and trembling with every shallow breath. The mechanic swallowed hard. He had expected damage, he had not expected this much. For a moment, uncertainty crept in, not fear but doubt. He knew how to flush chemical burns from human skin. He knew what neutralizers did to metal corrosion. He did not know how a dragon's biology responded to industrial acid rain. But uncertainty had never stopped him before. He removed his coat and gloves with deliberate care, placing them in a containment bin for later decontamination. He rolled up his sleeves again, revealing steady forearms dusted faintly with old scars. "Let's see what we can do," he murmured. The hatchling's luminous eyes followed him as he moved around the table. They were wide, rimmed faintly red from irritation, but alert, not vacant, not fatting. "That was something." He began with distilled water, warmed slightly to prevent shock. Using clean cloth pads, he flushed the worst of the residue from the burned areas. The hatchling flinched violently at first, a thin, sharp cry escaping its throat. "I know," he said quietly, "I know." The words were reflexive. It could not understand language, but tone carried meaning. He kept his voice low, even steady as his hands. The water ran pinkish for a moment where it touched irritated skin, then cleared. He worked slowly, careful not to apply too much pressure. He had rebuilt transmissions that required less delicacy than this. When the initial rinse was complete, he reached for the neutralizing solution again, this time diluted further. He tested it against a small patch of uninjured scale first, watching for reaction. Nothing adverse. Carefully, he misted the burned areas. A faint fizzing occurred where acid still lingered. Steam rose briefly, then dissipated. The hatchling's body trembled under his touch, wings twitching weakly against the padded surface. "Almost done," he murmured. He applied cooling gel next, normally reserved for industrial chemical exposure. It formed a thin protective layer over raw patches, sealing moisture in and shielding against infection. He smoothed it gently across blistered skin with 2 fingers, movements precise and controlled. His hands were steady. They had soldered fractured circuits smaller than a fingernail. They had aligned gears within tolerances measured in fractions of millimeters. They did not shake now. Gradually, the hatchling's cries softened. Its breathing, though still shallow, evened slightly. The violent trembling lessened to small shivers. Its claws, which had been scraping weakly at the mat in reflexive distress, relaxed. It watched him the entire time. Its eyes were not monstrous. They were frightened. There was no malice there, no spark of predatory calculation. Only pain and confusion and a desperate need not to be alone in it. Hours passed without him noticing. The storm outside softened from violent hiss to gentler patter. The worst of the acid deluge had shifted eastward, leaving behind lighter rainfall that tapped more quietly against the reinforced roof. The garage lights remained steady now, no longer flickering. He rechecked each treated area, adjusting gel where necessary. He improvised small bandage-like coverings from sterile cloth strips, securing them loosely with medical adhesive that would not cling to scales. The hatchling had stopped crying entirely. It lay still, exhausted beyond resistance, but conscious. Its gaze tracked him whenever he shifted position. Finally, when there was nothing more immediate to be done, the mechanic leaned back on his stool and removed his visor fully. Sweat dampened his hairline, grease streaked across his cheek, fatigue pressed heavily against his shoulders. "You're stubborn," he muttered softly. The hatchling blinked once. As if in response, it shifted. One tiny claw lifted shakily and hooked into the sleeve of his work jacket, not with force, not with threat, but with fragile insistence. To hold. He looked down at the small hook of pale claw-gripping worn fabric. Something inside his chest tightened unexpectedly. "All right," he said quietly, "I'm here." Days turned into weeks. Healing was slow. The mechanic rearranged the garage to accommodate a patient instead of machinery. He dimmed overhead lights, installing adjustable shields to reduce glare. Albino creatures, at least in the animal kingdom, were sensitive to bright light. He assumed this one would be no different. He constructed shaded corners from scrap metal sheets and heavy cloth, creating alcoves where the hatchling could retreat from brightness. He adjusted heat lamps to provide warmth without risking burns, measuring distance and temperature carefully until he found the right balance. At first, the hatchling barely moved. It slept often, curled tightly beneath dim warmth. When awake, it watched him with unblinking attention. He fed it cautiously, small portions of protein paste originally intended for emergency rations, then gradually introducing raw meat sourced from preserved supplies. Its appetite was hesitant but present. Every day he cleaned its burns, reapplying gel, monitoring for infection. The red patches slowly darkened, then began to knit closed beneath thin new layers of scale. He spoke occasionally while he worked, not because he expected comprehension, but because silence felt too heavy. Engines are easier, he said once while adjusting a bandage. They don't flinch. The hatchling tilted its head slightly at the sound of his voice. It began to respond to tone more than words. When his voice was calm, its body relaxed. When he moved too quickly, it tensed. Trust built in increments. The first time it did not flinch at his approach, he felt an absurd surge of accomplishment. The first time it leaned faintly into his touch rather than away, he nearly laughed in disbelief. Its albinism revealed itself more clearly as it healed. In normal light, its scales shimmered with a faint opalescent sheen, almost translucent at the edges. Veins beneath delicate wing membranes were visible like pale rivers branching outward. It was beautiful in a way that felt accidental and improbable. He researched late at night. Old myths, archived articles, speculative biology journals. Most references to dragons were folklore creatures of flame and destruction. None mentioned acid rain, none mentioned albinism. But he searched anyway. He learned about reptiles and avian bone structures, about metabolic rates in large-winged animals, about how pigmentation affected resilience to sunlight. He adapted what he could. The hatchling grew. Not rapidly at first, but steadily. Muscle formed beneath fragile frames, wings strengthened. The drooping joint that had once struggled to fold properly began to align as tendons developed. It practiced stretching beneath heat lamps, extending each wing cautiously, testing range. The scars from acid did not vanish entirely. Where burns had been worst, pale silver patterns formed, intricate lines branching across its scales like lightning frozen into skin. They caught light differently, gleaming faintly even in dimness. The mechanic traced one such pattern once with careful fingers. "Looks like you kept part of the storm," he murmured. The hatchling did not recoil. It began following him. At first only with its gaze, head turning wherever he moved in the garage. Then, gradually, with its body. Its steps were quiet despite growing size. Claws clicked softly against concrete floors. It shadowed him between workstations, pausing when he paused, tilting its head as he inspected engines or recalibrated filtration units. He found himself narrating tasks unintentionally. This valve shot, see the corrosion, happens when seals fail. The hatchling blinked, watching the movement of his hands. When rains came again, heavier than before, they remained inside. The mechanic reinforced the garage roof preemptively. He climbed ladders to inspect seams, applying fresh layers of protective sealant where old coatings had thinned. He improved drainage channels to prevent pooling. He rerouted runoff into expanded neutralization tanks he had constructed from salvaged barrels. The hatchling perched nearby, tail curled neatly around its feet. It observed each adjustment with sharp, focused intelligence. Once, when he struggled to hold a sheet of metal steady against wind slipping through a crack, the hatchling extended one wing instinctively, shielding him from the gust. He paused, glancing sideways. "Helpful," he said softly. It made a faint, almost pleased trill in response. Weeks turned into months. The creature no longer fit comfortably on the work table. It occupied a cleared section of the garage floor now, bedding arranged in layered insulation and cloth. Its wingspan, once small enough to tuck tightly against its body, now stretched wide when extended. One evening, as the sky darkened with another approaching storm, the mechanic stood near the open garage door, monitoring cloud formation. The air had shifted thicker electric. He prepared to seal the door before rainfall began. Behind him, claws clicked softly. He turned just as the hatchling, no longer truly a hatchling, stepped into the open space of the garage floor. Slowly, deliberately, it spread its wings. Fully, the membranes unfurled like pale silk catching faint light. They were wide, wider than he had anticipated. Translucent, yes, but strong now. Veins branched elegantly through them, and the silver scar patterns traced faint lightning along their edges. They almost glowed against the dim interior. He stepped back without meaning to. Astonishment stole his breath. "You've been practicing," he murmured. The dragon flexed its wings once, then twice, testing span. Air shifted subtly with the movement, not strong enough to lift yet, but strong enough to promise future flight. Thunder rumbled outside. The first drops of rain began to fall, soft at first, then sharper. The dragon turned its head toward the open door. For a moment, the mechanic saw something flicker across its features, memory perhaps, instinct, the place where acid rain had once meant agony and abandonment. It stepped forward. He stiffened slightly. "Careful," he warned quietly. The dragon paused at the threshold. Rain struck just beyond the protective overhang, hissing faintly where it hit exposed metal outside. It did not flinch. Instead, it looked back at him. Their eyes met. There was no fear there now. Only awareness. It took one more step, not into the rain but closer to him, close enough that its shoulder brushed against his arm lightly. A choice. The storm began in earnest, rain falling in corrosive sheets once more. Outside, the world still burned. Metal still rusted. Concrete still pitted and cracked. The sky had not softened its cruelty. But inside the reinforced garage, beneath steady lights and humming filters, something that had been abandoned beneath dissolving steel had survived. Not because the storm weakened. Not because the world grew kinder. But because someone had stayed. The mechanic rested his hand against the dragon's pale neck, feeling steady warmth beneath scaled skin. The silver lightning scars shimmered faintly beneath his fingers. He had chosen not to leave. And in doing so, he had repaired something far beyond machinery. The rain hissed against the roof above them, relentless and unchanged. Inside, neither of them faced it alone.